It's Friday in Tryon, North Carolina. It's been a good day because it's been overcast and we've had the relief from the bright sun. Even though it's been hot, it's not been nearly as hot because of the overcast skies. Nice breeze, and so a good day all around. We're in Proverbs, and this time we see a continuation of the dangers of sexual sin, and it gets pretty graphic between chapter 5, verse 12, and the end of the chapter, because it goes into some description of uh, giving in to lust and to a momentary pleasure. Uh, but it contrasts it with the fact that when we fall into this temptation, when we fall into this perversion, it's because we didn't listen, we didn't believe, and we didn't follow the instruction that we know God gives us about moral purity and about being bound to our wives and not being involved in fornication or adultery. What's interesting to me is, as a pastor and a counselor for many years, I would hear young men and young women with the terrible regrets of having given into sexual impurity, uh, lost marriages, lost families where the children were in the custody of the other mate, um, sorrow for having given up a godly woman for an ungodly woman, for one that can't be trusted, who proved it by her very act of being involved with somebody else, and vice versa. Very, very often we find just the same thing in reverse, where we find that women gave up godly husbands for perhaps a more handsome or a more virile male, um, thinking that there was going to be great pleasure in that, and then finding that if he was willing to cheat on his wife, or if he was willing to be involved with a married woman and destroy a home, that he couldn't be trusted in this new relationship. And so we find the great truths that are found here in these verses. And each person has to ask himself, as the psalmist, as the Proverbs writer rather, says, how did I get here? What caused this? Well, it was because I didn't incline my ear. It was because I didn't move it from my ear to my head to my heart. And it was because I didn't listen to the wisdom of God that was given to me. And once again, we see a contrast of those that withhold from the temptation of sin, the lust of the eye, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life, and stays with his own wife and appreciates what he has. Today's phrases are, why do you go out and look for hamburger when you have steak at home? And in many cases, that's exactly true. So what is the bottom line to all of this? Well, I think it would be remiss for me, especially since I'm talking very often here in this Proverbs section to youth, to remind them how important it is to not only date godly women, but then to look for godly women to marry, because it's those kind of women who will bring you the long-term satisfaction that's necessary to maintain a marriage, and that can be trusted in a relationship, so that you can have that ongoing relationship, and to be satisfied with that relationship and not go out looking someplace else. In verse 20 it says, why be exhilarated with an adulteress? I mean, after all, she's already made herself available to many others. And after all, if she couldn't be trusted in previous relationships, what makes you think she's going to be trusted in this relationship? And is the moments of fleeting pleasure worth what we looked at last time we studied? Is it worth the dishonor? Is it worth the drudgery? Is it worth the debt? Is it worth the disease that you might get to have that few moments of pleasure? Why be exhilarated with an adulteress? And we need to remember, most of all, that God sees. You see, it says that very clearly in verse 20 and 21 and 22. God knows what's going on. You may be able to, in today's technology, know exactly where your mate is, and you may be able to fool the people around you about what's going on, and you may be able to hide from society what you think you're doing, but God sees it all. And remember, the New Testament tells us about that which is done in darkness will be brought to light, and that which is done in secret will be shouted from the housetops. And you know, I got to tell you, I'm sorrowful that I have seen so many examples of even ministers who have completely dishonored the calling of ministry and completely dishonored their own life and their past because of sexual immorality and being enticed away, sometimes not by adultery, sometimes not by prostitutes, if you will, but thinking the grass is greener on the other side of the street and not being satisfied with the woman that God has brought to you, and many times trading a less godly woman for the one that they already had. And as a result, we're reminded here in Proverbs that your sin and your reputation go with you even beyond the grave. Let me say that again for you. Your sin and dishonor and reputation go far beyond even the grave. What will you be remembered for? When we call out the name David and Bathsheba, what do you think about? That mistake that David made because he wandered away from the principles of God. It went beyond the grave. Here we are thousands of years later, and we still talk about David's adultery, and it destroys his reputation even beyond the grave. And that's what chapter 5, verses 11 through 22 remind us. And we know that our iniquities and our sin entangle us. And we know that we can actually die because of the lack of following the instruction. It's a terrible price to pay. That's your thought for the day. God bless you and have a great day.